Joining us on the phones right now, GOP political strategist, co-founder, mustreadtexas.com. It's Matt Mackowiak. Matt, good morning. How are you?
Hey, Chad, I'm doing great. Good morning. How are you?
Doing great. Appreciate you coming on the show today. You've got an article in the Austin American-Statesman dealing with an issue that the Texas Legislature could bring up, probably will bring up at least in a debate in the Senate, and that is school choice. You start off talking about conservatives support school choice. However, there are some in the rural areas, including here in West Texas and in East Texas, many of whom are very conservative, who generally do not. In your opinion, kind of break down what you post about this and this rural-urban divide that we're seeing even among Republicans.
Yeah, and I appreciate you raising these questions this morning. First, look, I believe you can be a conservative and not support school choice. I just believe it requires a hell of a lot of explanation. At the end of the day, the reason that rural Republican elected officials, particularly at the state level, generally do not support school choice is because they hear it from their school districts and their teachers that they can't. And in rural areas, generally, private and charter school options are not available. So those members and the constituencies in those areas aren't familiar with those options to the same extent that you would be in urban areas. So that's one of the arguments against the quote voucher system that I don't think makes sense. Sometimes people say, well, vouchers will take money away from rural schools. We won't be able to have as many teachers or as much equipment or et cetera, our football program. If there are no school choice options in rural areas, then a quote voucher system would not take money out of those schools. At the end of the day, you either believe that a free market is a good thing or it's not. Right now, the public education system in Texas and around the country is effectively a monopoly in the sense that if you're a poor, you don't have school choice. You have to send your child. You have no option to send your child anywhere but the school that your zip code requires you to send them to. If you're a rich parent, no matter where you live, you do have school choice. You can put your child in private school. You can move. You have all kinds of options available to you. So I think there's a reasonable debate to have over school choice. I'm not in favor of every proposal that's out there. I generally favor the education savings account model that was used in Nevada and was held constitutional in that state. And appears to be working, and I think you're going to see that be the vehicle in Texas, particularly in the Texas Senate, starting in January. But look, I understand there's strong opinions on both sides of this issue, and no one wants to hurt a school in a rural area. No one wants to hurt the football program. Those schools are, the largest employers in rural areas. They really are sort of the bedrock part of their community. At the end of the day, though, it's generally not rural areas where the problems exist. The problems exist in urban areas, in lower socioeconomic areas. Those children are trapped in failing schools. There's over 1,000 failing schools in Texas. It is incredibly difficult to close a failing public school. So ultimately, you need competition to raise standards, to increase innovation, and to just raise the bar overall with education. We all want our children to get a good education. The question is, how can we make our system better?
Well, there's a huge difference between you take schools here in the Lubbock area where when I grew up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area where okay, I'm locked into that elementary school, I'm locked into that middle school, I'm locked into that high school, unless my parents either got a divorce or my mom went and taught in a different school district, or unless we went with the private school route. Out here in Lubbock, and I was amazed when I first moved out here, is that parents have a choice of moving their kids around, whether it be Lubbock ISD to Friendship ISD to Lubbock Cooper ISD. Parents have much more options out here. And I think that's affected a lot of the rural lawmakers. They're having to get an education on what it looks like in Houston, what it looks like in Dallas, what it looks like in Austin. Is that a large part of this? Is that there just aren't a lot of people who know what rural versus the urban areas that their school systems look like?
That's exactly right. My wife and I and privileged to personally support a charter school system in Austin called Idea Public Schools. They were founded in South Texas in very poor areas with students that speak English as a second language or not at all. The schools in Austin have a 100% college acceptance rate. Charter schools or public schools, people oftentimes get that confused. They have a lottery system. Anyone can apply. The lottery has to be done the right way, and then whoever gets in gets taught there. They don't receive public dollars for the construction of the buildings, but they do receive public dollars for the teaching of the students. And so there's an inequity there for charter schools. A good one. I mean, if you're a state rep from Lubbock or Amarillo or Abilene, you probably don't really understand what an inner city school district in Houston or Dallas is like. And look, to be really honest, those are the problem areas. It's the urban areas in the poor parts of those cities where the education systems are totally inadequate. And so at the end of the day, we all want to see every child in Texas receive a good education. And the best way, I think, to do that is to inject competition and free market forces into public education. That's really the question. But you're right. I mean, I have a sense of what this education system's like where I live, although we don't have children yet. Everyone knows what their own community's like. They don't necessarily understand what it's like in other parts of the state. And so there is a lot of education that has to happen there among elected officials. So we'll see what happens. I mean, Democrats really want to see more money spent on public education due to the school finance ruling at the state Supreme Court level. Republicans, particularly conservatives in the Texas Senate, led by Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, really want to see school choice expansion in Texas this legislative session. So there may be a way to trade one for the other. We'll see what happens.
What about that? It all boils down to the House, I think, with this battle, don't you? And where do you think this battle ends up within the House, if they even listen, even if they have a debate on it?
That's a great question. Generally, you take all the Democrats, you add the rural Republicans, and you have a block that is so large that school choice can't pass the House. You look at generally the chairman of the Public Education Committee and the committee's members are generally anti-school choice. That's just been the recent history. Again, my hope is, conservatives in the Texas Senate may not get everything they want, but maybe they can get half of what they want if they can work with rural lawmakers in the House. I don't see an obvious path through the House. See, how it goes. It's always a challenge, but my sense is that Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick is going to pass a school choice bill, perhaps not in the first 60 days unless the governor makes an emergency item, but perhaps there in the first 20 days after the 60-day period to try to put pressure on the House and to try to rally public support so that something can happen. Look, ultimately, the question of educational savings accounts, which is the model I think the Senate's going to move forward on, the question comes down to, do you believe the dollars that are spent on children should be in the parents' hands or should they be in sort of the government's hands? That's ultimately the question. If you believe the government should decide how education dollars are spent, then you don't want to make any changes whatsoever, and you want a monopoly to exist in the public education system. If instead you think it should be up to the parent to choose where those dollars are spent, not to spend it on food or booze and things like that, but within a regulated system where they can choose to go to a charter school, a private school, a religious school, home school, or the public school in their geographic area, maybe that's how we inject competition into the system so that if you can't close a public school, maybe parents pull their children out of failing public schools, because that I think is how we're going to ultimately, raise standards across the board, and that's what we have to have.
Matt, let's real quickly, let's turn our attention to the transition for Donald Trump. It looks like Rex Tillerson is going to be the pick as Secretary of State, and Governor Perry actually leads or is one of the leaders to be the next Energy Secretary. Your thoughts on both of those?
Yeah, Tillerson kind of came out of nowhere a little bit in the last few days. He is, I think, a very well-known Fortune 50, Fortune 10 CEO. He has a lot of global experience. There's a lot of questions about his relationship with Putin. Russia apparently received one of the highest non-civilian honors that Russia can give. I'm told, I saw on Morning Joe this morning that Tillerson was recommended specifically by Condi Rice, who's a Russia expert, and Bob Gates, and I thought that was very interesting. Tillerson does face a rocky confirmation. It appears John McCain and Lindsey Graham and others might decide to oppose his nomination on the Russia question by itself. Keep in mind, you have to get 50 votes plus the vice president to get confirmed, and there are 52 Republicans. So if you lose 3 Republicans and you don't get a Democrat, you can't get confirmed. As it relates to Perry, I think Perry is the front runner for energy. I think it's the job he wants most. He obviously has tremendous executive experience, and as governor of Texas for 14 years, he understands the energy industry very, very well. So, we'll see. We'll see where it goes from here. There's a couple other people in the mix for energy as well, and Perry could fall back to Veterans Affairs, where he'd also be a very good fit. it's going to be a big week for the cabinet. We'll see what happens.
All right, Matt, what can people find on mustreadtexas.com, and how do they sign up for that morning email?
Yeah, appreciate that. We just put our email out this morning about 7:30. It goes to 4,000 people across the state of Texas and across the country. You can sign up at mustreadtexas.com. My analysis of Perry's potential selection as Energy Secretary is in there, in addition to other news from around the state. We put the top news, opinion, and blog items from around Texas all in one place. You can sign up at mustreadtexas.com.
All right, Matt, as always, appreciate your time. We'll visit with you next week.
Take care, Chad. Have a great week.